Hi there. My name is Eric Migicovsky. I'm the founder of Pebble. We make a smartwatch that runs apps and talks to your smartphone. I'm really happy to be here, and I really appreciate the invitation. This is it's always amazing to come back to Seoul for me, and it's a really special experience to be able to come back and share a little bit about my story with you. I'd like to start off 6 years ago. I was studying systems design engineering at the University of Waterloo when me and my team were actually building the very first generation for us of wearable computers. You might be interested, our first product ever was actually not a watch, but a little computer that fit inside your wallet, so you could track how much money you spent right when you were taking the money out of your wallet. And this is me in the engineering lab at the university. This is actually after I graduated. We still had the key codes to be able to get back into the university lab, so we would break in on the weekends to do our assembly and manufacturing. 3 years ago, I moved from Canada down to Silicon Valley. We joined the Y Combinator program, and we were working on a watch called Impulse. It was a watch that worked with BlackBerry smartphones. Some of you might remember BlackBerry. BlackBerry's the one with the keyboard that was really popular a couple years ago. Not as popular right now, but this was our first product, Impulse. Today, I'm leading a company that's about to go head-to-head with Samsung, Apple, and Google in this epic battle to see whose vision of wearables will prevail. Now, if you think about 6-year-old Eric, Eric from 6 years ago, thinking about what he was going to be doing and working on, I wouldn't have been able to predict this. Not at all. I was only focused on building a product that I wanted to use in my daily life. But I think that's part of the interesting thing about our story is you can start off at one end and then find yourself several years later following through on a really interesting and different vision. So, we were one of the first companies to launch our product on Kickstarter. Kickstarter's a website where people can post their project, spread their idea with the world, and then if anyone else is interested in that idea, they can actually back or support the project. This now seems to be somewhat of an excellent prototype for launching hardware companies, but at the time, it was really the only thing that we could do. We had tried to raise money from traditional venture capitalists. We had raised a small amount of angel financing, but at the end of the day, we didn't have the support from VCs or investors to help us get to the next stage. So we took to Kickstarter to launch our idea. Now, my day job is to lead Pebble, is to lead the company. It's not really to give speeches. So I think that I'm not necessarily the best person to give perfect, insightful advice on exactly how you should start your companies and work on your companies. What I hope to be able to provide today is a set of anecdotes and experiences that I've gone through over the first 6 years of running my company, and it's up to you guys to extract any sort of wisdom that you think might apply to your companies. I'm not necessarily one to make sweeping generalizations or give broad pieces of advice. I'm much more about those targeted little anecdotes and stories. That having been said, I will start off with a pretty broad sweeping generalization. One thing that I've noticed over the 6 years working on my company is that this product market fit is the most important thing that you could ever achieve. Unfortunately, I'm not actually going to be able to talk about that today. It's extremely personal and extremely, it really just is something that you guys have to do. The one piece of advice that Paul Graham, who was the founder of Y Combinator, gave me is the same that he gives everyone, which is make something that people want, which is a little bit difficult because it's not really a roadmap or a guideline or a set of steps that you have to follow in order to make something. But when you make something that people want, that's when you know that you've achieved product market fit. Instead, I want to talk a little bit about what happens after you achieve product market fit. For us, we had that, that point when things just clicked, when our marketing and the product that we were making finally synced up. That was during our Kickstarter campaign, when we realized that we were actually making something that people wanted. I'd like to talk about some of the problems and issues that came up at Pebble after our Kickstarter campaign. These are things that you might not always expect at the early stages of working on a company, but the problem is, even after spending every waking moment working on achieving product market fit, there's a couple other things that will come up and bite you pretty much right after that. So the three main things that I want to focus on, sort of on the business side of the equation, is how do you build a team, how do you expand your network, and how do you stack your chips up and put some money in the bank. The team at Pebble grew quite a bit in the last year, but it wasn't always that way. For the first 4 years of our existence, it was me, one of my colleagues, and 1 or 2 interns working out of the garage or the living room of the house that we were living in at the time. It is the product that we made and launched on Kickstarter, Pebble, is the product of just a couple people dedicated to making something that they wanted. When we launched on Kickstarter and raised $10 million from 69,000 people, we only had 3 people at the company. It was a bit interesting going through the process of seeing kind of the product finally the world take hold of your product with only having a 3-person team. What we did right after Kickstarter was I went back to my university, talked to some of my friends that I went through school with, and said, hey, how about you drop out of whatever job you were working on, whatever grad school program you were working on, and fly down to Silicon Valley and come work on Pebble. We worked as a team of 10 people for the first 6 or 7 months after our Kickstarter campaign. We flew to China, we talked to manufacturers, and we worked on getting this product made. We didn't focus on hiring too much in those early days. And this was coming from a piece of advice that one of my friends, another founder, gave me. He said, as a small company, you can only truly focus on 1 or 2 things at a time. And since we were in the midst of manufacturing 85,000 units of a new product, we didn't really have the bandwidth or the brain cycles to be able to focus our full efforts on hiring. So we put that on pause. And as soon as we started shipping to our Kickstarter backers, that's when we started turning on the hiring plan. From the beginning of January 2013 to today, we hired over 70 people. And I think the real thing that we've learned through this process is not that, everyone knows that it's very hard to hire. But what's even harder is building a team of people that are working towards a common goal, especially as you begin bringing on new people to your team. So how did we do that? We maintained a strong set of team cohesion through what I like to call radical transparency. We try to make sure that every single person on our team has the capability of learning about the business, learning about the product, learning about the stage that we're in, even if they're not going to be the ones that are making critical decisions about those individual tasks. So for example, we would have Friday meetings where the entire company, now 80 people, crams into one conference room, and we walk through some of the milestones that we hit that week, some of the problems that we faced, and the plans for the following weeks ahead. We also work really hard to make sure that every team member knows about the finances of the company. So this is something that's not exactly normal for all startups, knowing what the corporate structure looks like, how many shares are outstanding in the company, and what are the finances looking like? How much money are we making? Where are we spending money? How are we doing our budgeting? For me, this is a really personal thing because I feel like once people are given more information about the company that they're working at, that empowers them to make better decisions. I also learned a lot about what it means to hire people that are older, smarter, and potentially much more experienced than you. At the beginning, I started the company straight out of university. I didn't have any particular experience working in consumer electronics. But since then, I've started hiring people who have. Now, one of the one of the most useful techniques that I've found for hiring people who are potentially more experienced than yourself is through your network, is through the employees that you already have at your company, is through your mentors and advisors and people that are helping you out. One of the things that we do at Pebble is during the first week, we don't literally do this, but we tend to shake people from their legs until some of their friends come out and we end up going to recruit them. We think that bringing people on board that have some sort of emotional or social connection to people who already work at the company makes for that much of a better connection to new employees. Here's another little trick that I found. In order to build a network, you have to be able to build a company. You have to be able to tap into various different networks that can help connect you to people. So when we moved down to Silicon Valley, I ended up reaching out by email to people who had started companies in the past or who had made big impressions on the consumer electronics space. Now, this is before our Kickstarter project. We were just a small company working out of our living room, but I was reading books from the 80s around the early days of the Macintosh. I was reading one of my favorite books, which is about the early days of the Palm Pilot, and all these names started popping up of people who had a big effect on these really interesting, groundbreaking products. So I just emailed them. I emailed Bruce Horn, who was 19 when he worked on the original Mac project. I emailed some of the people who started and worked at Palm in the early days. And I asked them if I could just take them out for a coffee and pick their brains on what it was like to work on a completely new product like this. The really cool thing, I don't know if, I doubt that it's unique to Silicon Valley, but one of the coolest things that I found is just that people are so friendly and so willing to give advice, to talk and to connect you, that every single person that I emailed from the history of wearable computing and pen computing in the early days of personal computing responded to my email, took me out for a drink, took me out for coffee, and I was able to connect into their network. And this, it makes so much sense to me now, but at the time I didn't really expect that. I didn't think that people would be that open to providing advice and providing mentorship. So we actually made a lot of our key hires through the Palm network, just by one connection that I made after reaching out to some of the guys who were there at the beginning. Nowadays, we gain more and more of our employees through connections like that. On the network side, it's built in a very similar manner. This is a photo of our first developer retreat that we held at our office at the end of last year. There's over 10,000 people that are building Pebble apps around the world, and we wanted to figure out how we can help them connect to other people that are making Pebble apps, and also kind of build this early network of people building apps for wearable devices. So we took some advice from our friends at Twilio, and we hosted our first developer conference of 50 or 60 people that were building apps from all around the world. We paid to fly them into Palo Alto, and we spent 3 or 4 days probably having a couple beers, but also working on some of the apps that are now available on the Pebble App Store. And what we learned from this experience was that a little bit of FaceTime, a little bit of personal one-to-one connection goes a really long way when you're building out that early network. We ended up hiring 3 or 4 engineers from this pool of developers that flew out to our office. But more importantly, they met each other, and when they went back to Moscow or France or London or Taiwan, they ended up talking to each other online and continuing the network that we started, that we kind of made when we connected them together in person. The other thing that I found a lot of value from is a network of supportive founders. One of the most important things that came out of Y Combinator, which is a startup incubator that I attended in Silicon Valley, is the network of founders that move through the different phases of startup life together. So a lot of people, when they think about Silicon Valley, they think about an echo chamber of all these different mobile social apps that seem like everyone is sort of just copying and doing the same ideas over and over again. But I'm here to tell you that the truth of the matter is actually that the seemingly echo chamber-like situation in Silicon Valley is actually much deeper than that. even though the ideas may seem somewhat similar on the front end, each and every single one of those founders is going through problems, is facing fundraising, network, hiring, legal, HR, all these different issues that you guys are facing in your startups as well. But the really cool thing about, I guess, the network that I was part of is how readily people were able to share advice and to share their problems, knowing that the odds are someone else has gone through a very similar problem to you in the past. So, for example, immigration. We've gone through more than our fair share of immigration issues in the US, but we were able to reach out to other people and connect to lawyers and connect to people who've done it before and helped us through that kind of phase. Now at Pebble, almost 50% of the people that work at the company were born outside of the US and immigrated into the Bay Area. The third really important piece of the puzzle is funding. And unfortunately, I'm definitely not the guy to be able to give you advice on how to raise money. I've had a fairly poor track record when it comes to raising money from institutional sources like venture capitalists and angel investors. I was able to raise a small amount of money from the Canadian government, actually, and a very small series of angel investors. But when it came time to raise my Series A and to raise a little bit more money to be able to get Pebble off the ground, we were completely shut out. I talked to 20 investors through very, very good introductions, and at the end of the day, we had nothing. We traipsed up and down Sand Hill Road in Menlo Park, trying to raise financing before we went on Kickstarter, but we were just unable to. And I think that problem of how do you raise funding for your project is one of the least tractable, the least solvable problems in startups. It's a very binary outcome. You either raise money or you don't. And I'd like to recommend trying to take a slightly different track. There is one method of funding, or one of many methods of funding, that doesn't involve going to investors, and that's going to the crowd. It's making a product that you think people will want, and then telling people about it. We found that our success on Kickstarter was able to not only support that first round of watches that we created, but fueled our next year and a half worth of development. In the end, we ended up raising venture capital financing from some investors on Sand Hill Road, but we were in a much better position by the time we got to them. We had product market fit. We had thousands of customers, happy customers in the field that we could introduce them to talk to, and we were able to raise at a much better valuation. I think that at the end of the day, you should focus on working on things that you actually have control over. And fundraising is one of those things that, as a first-time entrepreneur like myself, I felt like I had very, very little control over. So even though I didn't take my own advice at the time, I did try to raise money. What I like to do now is talk about how it's possible for startups to get through that early stage of their existence without having to spend weeks or months and a multitude of meetings talking to investors and kind of building something that investors want instead of building something that your users will want. So that's my little piece on startup investing. I'm going to be here for the whole conference, and I'll be wandering around. So if anyone has any questions about some of the topics of what it's like to work on a startup in Silicon Valley or anywhere around the world, I'm more than happy to talk about it. Once again, my advice is not necessarily the exact thing that you can use to start your company. I look at it much more as an opportunity for someone who's had some interesting experiences through the previous 6 years, to be able to share and to be able to talk about that. I'm also looking forward to talking in a few minutes with Sunny from Misfit about wearables and the next generation of what this technology looks like. In particular, we at Pebble are focused on building a platform. We don't think that wearables will be one device or even one company's product going forward. It's a network of devices that talk to each other, that talk to software, that talk to the cloud, and bring these new and interesting experiences to life on your body. So I'm looking forward to talking more about this. But again, thanks very much for the opportunity to be here. And I'm looking forward to this entire conference. So thanks very much. Kamsahamnida.